Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the Call of the Soul podcast. We're really getting into our stride with this mini-series, which will be 5 episodes long. We're talking this week about soul fragmentation, and by that we mean energy left behind in a past life, displaced energy. And the example that Doug is going to use to explain this comes from Harry Potter, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy hearing about that. We're also going to talk about how depression can be caused by not following the path of the soul, and how we can become trapped in a job or a relationship that is not really working for us. He's going to also explain how the subconscious really understands metaphor. We also go on to talk about how past life regression is very useful for dealing with unexplained pain. He finishes off by giving us an insight into approximately how many past life regression therapy sessions you may need. So here we go. Here's episode 3, Soul Fragmentation, as ever with Doug Buckingham. Doug, in the last episode, we talked about the soul's unfinished business quite a bit. And now I'd like to delve a little deeper into that and ask you to explain soul fragmentation.
Yes, that's a good question, Simon. Soul fragmentation is something that often occurs at the death point. It's something that we look out for as therapists, and it's also something that may happen within the duration of a past life. In a way, all of the work that we're doing is really about repatriating, if you like, the fragmented energy of the soul. It's all energy that we've left behind in some way, though sometimes it happens a little bit more obviously than at other times. When we take a client through the death point of the life, what's really important for us as therapists to do is to actually check that they've got all of their energy, i.e. their soul energy, out of that physical shell that they're in, and they're taking it with them. And you would be surprised the number of times that people have left it behind, for want of a better word. And you know, it's a reasonably well-known fact, if you like, that in times of trauma, which the death point in a life may well be, certainly in past lives, that we may displace, or part of our energy or part of it gets disassociated from the main energy body. So part of what we're looking to do at the death point is to collect that energy again.
Okay, I think I understand what you're talking about there, but could you give an example of somebody who suffered a trauma at the end of their past life?
I'm going to take us into fiction to explain that, because it's something that I think a lot of people will identify with, and I'm going to go into the world of Harry Potter because J.K. Rowling actually explained it really, really well. I think most people will know that story, and in it, Voldemort, the bad guy, actually used a process of creating Horcruxes in which he deliberately put part of his soul energy to achieve immortality. Now, the point of that was he actually used a trauma, or in this case, he murdered people. So the soul split at that point, a very traumatic thing to the soul, and he was able to put part of his energy into various objects that he used and hid away. Part of the Harry Potter story was that actually when he tried to kill Harry Potter when he was a baby, he accidentally made a Horcrux out of Harry Potter, i.e. part of his soul energy got fragmented, and this was a big part of the story that went through from books 1 to 7 that only got resolved in the 7th book. So he'd actually had part of his energy living within Harry and influencing Harry's moods and thoughts and feelings at times. So, you know, it's quite a nice way that she explained the concept of soul fragmentation in a couple of different ways. I'm guessing that she'd studied something similar in order to put it into a story and think very well about it.
So if you suffered a trauma at the end of a past life, then that energy can affect you in a subsequent life, and I guess when somebody comes for healing, you're talking about their current life.
There's a couple of ways of looking at it. Sometimes it's actually something that we're lacking, that energy that got left behind in the death point. It may be the quality that we need. It may be our guts. I've had people who've come to past life regression and they've been in various unpleasant situations where they've had their guts, their stomach pulled out of them, their intestines in Spanish Inquisition, things like that. And it's strange, but metaphorically this can actually relate to guts in the current life, to confidence to actually stand up to people. So, it's a very, as I said, it's a metaphorical way of looking at it, but sometimes it's something that we're lacking. Sometimes also soul fragmentation can be in a place. It may be that a particular place on the planet, in this country, wherever it may be, we've actually left part of our energy there. It may, this is quite common in the some shamanic traditions, that we need to go back to a certain place to recoup our energy. Even in the current life, we can relate to that. Maybe there was a house where we lived when we were young that we really didn't want to move, but our dad got a new job, our mum got a new job, whatever it was, we had to go to a new town, new place. We might have actually left a little bit of our energy behind. Now, all of the great spiritual traditions, and even in some of the more traditional aspects of some of the religions, they tell us to be present, to have all of our energy in the present moment. Eckhart Tolle is the 21st century exponent of that, but it means be present. So that means getting all of our energy back into the present moment from the past and from the future. And this is really what soul fragmentation is all about. The fragmentation is what's happened. We've displaced energy in the past through no fault of our own, maybe even when we were a kid. Kids often fragment their energy when horrible things like abuse happens in the current life. And, it's how they, there are many possible explanations after that, but part of the therapy for them is actually bringing that energy back into the here and now, into the adult, and becoming wholer again, for want of a better word, or more whole, I should probably say.
So, Doug, do conditions like depression relate to soul fragmentation?
I'm a fan of the theory that one of the reasons behind depression is that we are not following the path of the soul. And you could look around the world and you could say people are eating themselves silly, they're drinking themselves silly, they're taking drugs to whatever their thing is to avoid being present with themselves. We could look at it that way. We could look at the fact that a lot of people are trapped in jobs they don't like doing and they're unable to do what they truly want to, and we could argue that that's not following the path of the soul. Also, though, depression in the context of past lives often means that we, in the past life, that we have given up in some way. For example, the slave who gets taken into slavery by the whoever it is who's doing the slaving, kind of gives up on their life. They know there's kind of nowhere to go rather than shuffle around in the manacles that they've got on them. There are many examples where people simply give up on life, and that, strangely enough, can filter through into the current life and can be, I've worked with a number of people where this has been the source of the depression, the fact that they're still carrying that malaise, that feeling that they can't do it, whatever you want to call it.
I do like the metaphor of shackles in that slaving story there. That's a very good way to describe how many of us, I think, feel that we are kind of caught in situations, we're tied to situations in our life. It causes us, to fall into depression. But I was also thinking about examples of people who've come to you for past life regression therapy, who've got to the root of this. They've explored their death point. They have found a way to move on. So what is happening to their energy at that point of healing?
I'm going to point out, by the way, because I like the fact that you raised the point around manacles and shackles. I talked about metaphorical instances a little bit earlier. Our subconscious mind, which is about 90% of our consciousness, understands metaphor very, very clearly. It relates to metaphor, it relates to imagery. So sometimes the very concept of metaphors like shackles, me talking about guts a little bit earlier, we may go, oh, well, that can't mean anything. However, subconsciously, it's a massive thing. So releasing that shackle, getting your guts back, logically, it doesn't always make sense, but deep inside in the subconscious, it may be exactly the gateway we need to walk through to move forward. And I know I haven't answered your question there, but I just wanted to pick up on a very important point that I think you've just raised.
Well, when we were talking there, I did have a very strong image of shackles, of a man in shackles on a boat going from the Caribbean to America, and then being in shackles, and that image did stay in my mind. In fact, some other images have come up whilst we've been talking. But I'm going to press you here a little bit.
Please.
Because I'd like to get to the sort of crux of it, if you like, about healing in this context. So how past life regression therapy heals the energy that is upset or is trapped or is left behind in a past life.
Okay, that's the most important question, of course. The simplest possible thing to say is it does, and try it, of course, because the only way you can ever believe it for yourself is to experience it. But if we're going to go into the world of theory at this point, we could say it's that metaphorical healing in the subconscious that we've just talked about. It opens up a path in our neural pathways, whatever it may be in our brain. But also what happens is there's a few things that go on. And one of them is that energy that leaves the body at the death point and leaves the physical body behind is an energy body that is still carrying those patterns. Now, we need to talk about the aura, the energy field, and I'm not going to go into big explanations about that, but maybe we'll do another podcast at some point that explains that in a little bit more detail. But we carry those patterns, if you like, in our energy field. The soul remembers. And what the soul will do before it comes back into the next incarnation is quite possibly choose to work on that exact same pattern. Now, that will be sitting in the etheric field within the aura. The etheric field being the one that is most close to the physical body. And the etheric field will mirror, if you like, the fact that you died in that life with a bad knee, and hey presto, the etheric body will contain the bad knee, and at some point in your current life, if your soul has chosen to work with it, you will develop a bad knee to work through that karma, we might call it, that relates to the bad knee. So there's a few things that are going on. Remember the soul choice, the fact that we're carrying it in the energy body, and possibly also the fact that it's working quite metaphorically within the subconscious. Yeah. Does that answer your question a bit more helpfully?
It does, thank you. I'm still searching for some examples of cases that you've cleared people's energy and restored it through past life regression therapy. And I know you don't want to reveal clients' private details, but another example, you've given so many good ones, if you could just try and pull one out of the air.
We had somebody on a course quite recently who'd had, I'm not sure whether it was lifelong or whether it was very long shoulder pain in the current life. And I'm talking, when I say a long time, I'm talking 20 years or so, I believe. And in the past life, that person was being tortured in some way, or something not that pleasant was being done for them, and the shoulder was dislocated or something of that ilk. And what needed to happen, part of the transformation, when we left the body behind, she took that shoulder pain with her, per se, and took it into where we transform the lives, and you might want to call that the spirit world, you might want to call that the light, you might want to call it whatever name you like at this point, but it's essentially a vehicle or a place of healing. And there she received healing energy for that shoulder that she experienced in a way which people experience very differently, whether it's similar to Reiki healing, whether it's similar to spiritual healing. Generally, when we're doing it within the context of a regression, I hate to say it's better, but it generally tends to have a deeper resonance, because not only have we done the healing, but we've also touched the origin of the problem by looking into the story. And that's one way that we work with physicality. Anyway, ever since the course, which was 2 months ago, her shoulder's been fine.
I'd like to ask you what kind of treatment she tried for that shoulder injury before she came to past life regression therapy.
I'm honestly not aware of that, to be honest with you. I suspect she tried a few things because she's interested in the holistic world, but I couldn't say this or that. And to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter. The fact that she'd had a lifelong pain for 20 years or so, and it's now changed. And I could tell you a number of different stories around that. It's it's quite a common thing. We tend to become a little bit blasé about the fact that as therapists we're helping people to make big changes for themselves, but it does happen quite regularly.
Because things can manifest in your body for no particular reason. I mean, if you move awkwardly and put your back out, you kind of know the reason, or you think you do. But sometimes these things happen. You can literally wake up in the morning with a pain in your body and you don't know where it came from. And yes, you might go and find some therapy for that, physical therapy, and it might not actually clear it. And then I imagine people then start to look around for other ways of healing.
Yes, absolutely. Unexplainable pain is something that we as regression therapists go, yep, we'll work with that, when it makes no sense within the context of the current life.
So to sum up how this therapy works, you can really heal pretty much anything then, because we talked about depression, we talked about emotional issues, and obviously a death point, trauma is very emotionally driven, but now we're talking about actual physical ailments or physical conditions that can be cured.
We're talking about relationships, we're talking about behavioural problems. I'd like to dispel the notion of healing pretty much anything, because that sounds as though we've got a magic wand sitting somewhere in our back pocket. In theory, anything can be healed so long as it's in line with what the soul wants to achieve in this lifetime. So a very common thing is that we have a very material focus on this planet. So a lot of people say, well, I'd like to heal my money problems. And perhaps that's not the goal. Perhaps that's not the goal of the soul. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's certainly something that one can work on. But, and again, it's energy. It's just like any other relationship. We have a relationship to money. We have a relationship to our physicality, to other people, etc., etc. So in theory, it could be healed. But it's always, we need to bear in mind, is it for the highest good right here, right now?
One final question. How many sessions normally would it take to find the root of the problem and then to clear it out? Now, I realise that there's probably infinite answers to that question, but just for the listeners who are picking this up, just give them an idea. Surely it can't necessarily always happen in one session, for example.
No, I try to dispel the notion of the magic wand, which is really that it's happening in one session, but sometimes it does. Generally, if people phone me up, and it will, as you rightly pointed out, there are an infinite number of answers to that, but generally I'm going to say 2 or 3 sessions should get you to a place where you're moving very nicely ahead. I had a client who's very recent, a couple of months ago, was taking antidepressants from the doctors, was struggling with life, quite frankly. And when they rang me up, they said, do you think this could possibly help me? And 3 sessions later, frankly, they're good as gold. They're off the medication. They're moving forward in their life. And I have to say they were very committed to their own process, which helped quite a lot. But, they came out of what I would say was quite a dark place into a very positive place after only 3 sessions. And bear in mind that some people spend a year or 2 years in psychotherapy or psychoanalysis or whatever it might be. So regression is actually pretty quick in the bigger context of things.
Doug, thank you very much. That's a really good place to end this episode.
My pleasure.
Well, I really enjoyed listening to Doug talking about people that have gone through past life regression with difficult problems, emotional and physical, and found a way to cure themselves or ease their pain and come out of a difficult situation, which is what this work is really all about. In the next episode, we're moving on to talk about karma. Now, that's something you might feel that you know something about. But of course, Doug has his own take on it, and within the context of past life regression, it's a fascinating episode and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you get notification of when the next episode becomes available. I hope you're enjoying it and we look forward to talking to you again very soon.